The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, the home of Googleization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on in the world of business, technology, and HR. Here's your host, Ira Wolf, and co-host Keith Campagna.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Googleization Nation and Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show. Today is 2.0 day, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what that means. For anybody following me on social media, you probably know about that already, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Today, we've got a topic that is on most people's minds. Certainly if you're following the election and politics, but we're not going to be talking about the election and politics. We're going to be talking about the workplace, what's going on with HR, and the topic cybersecurity. It's a new topic for us. We haven't actually had this, Keith, and but it's certainly we should be talking about it. And the more I dug into this, the more we should have been talking about it. So a lot earlier. We'll be there. Again, and I think every day there's some news about that. Even beyond the politics. How many credit card hacks have there been? Hits us personally every time that happens. But it comes to HR. I don't know, Keith. Do you see it much I guess in conferences or articles? I mean, I don't see a whole lot of conversation going on. It's almost like HR just defaulted to IT on this subject. And as we've talked about a lot of other things, when they default to other people, when they don't know, they get ignored. And when they get ignored, that's ripe for a mistake.
100%. And I could go deep on this one based off of the selling experience,
you can.
Right? Because once you get to those enterprise organizations, let me just say this to anybody who doesn't know. If you decide you're going to buy a software and you don't tell your security, your IT people, you're not going to get in. And for the most part, Ira, I think that organizations realize the value of their IT staff, and it's always, and I mean capital always, a pleasure to have CIOs and IT leaders on calls when I was selling, because they simply understand business, they understand the impact, and it's almost easier to sell, in my humble opinion. It was almost easier to paint a big picture with the IT staff and the CIOs in terms of the value and the business impact that software has over HR. I want to say 3, maybe 4 to 1.
So, I mean, you've been on both. You've been on a couple sides of this. Obviously, you've sold HR technology. You're now doing, helping people evaluate the ROI on that. You've certainly used it in the past. So you've sort of covered all the bases. But part of the challenge, I guess, is that if your company is ready to purchase a new, whether ATS or payroll system, whatever it is, some type of HR technology, even if it's a chatbot, doesn't matter. You don't want to. You need to have IT involved in it, because they're certainly the experts at evaluating the functionality and the security of it. The problem is that if you default to IT and they make the selection based on the security, then maybe the functionality from the HR perspective isn't there. And then it goes, whether it doesn't do the job they were expecting it to do, or it has a horrible candidate experience. So I'm sure there are some systems out there that have great security, but they're horrible for the candidate, which then, kind of defeats the purpose of it. So,
and in addition to that, and maybe Clinton could add a little color to this when we bring him on, but there's all the other things that people do with company computers that have to do with uploading, downloading. You've got all the Chrome extensions that are out there. And literally, I could tell people, this is what I always tell people, I know that there are ones and zeros. I really don't know what they do. So it's fun to me to know that it's intense. It's just super intense. And it's kind of interesting how we really haven't had any cybersecurity conversations on the show after a year and a half. It's about time.
Yeah, I mean, we're as much, we're culprits in this too, because it's a hot topic. It should be, it's so important. But we sort of, fell into that trap and defaulted it. So we're going to change that today. So there's a couple things. I mean, there's even, and I don't know, this falls under the umbrella of security and certainly privacy. But one of the questions that I sort of glossed over this in the beginning is I wonder, what's a company policy when it comes down to mailing and printing job applications and resumes? We see that all the time. I mean, people print them out, and then what happens to them? And that sort of breaks the security, because the technology could have great security protecting the privacy of the candidate and the employee, but then people print it out and they email it, and what happens there? So there's a whole lot of vulnerabilities. But before we get there, we're going to bring on Clinton Eppleman. Who's a cybersecurity specialist for Morefield Communications. I know Morefield way back. I lived in Lancaster County, and at one time I don't know if this was the only thing they did, but a lot of it was like two-way communication. So they've come a long way in that regard. But before we get there, just want to go back to something I mentioned earlier about today is 2.0 day. Actually, that was yesterday officially, but the second edition of my book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization, edition 2.0, is out. Hit the digital bookshelves yesterday. I'm not sure if it hit any physical bookshelves, but it hit the digital bookshelves. And for those who pre-ordered it, you can get a free book. I put this up on Facebook that, people thought I was crazy for doing it. But for the first, there's a limited number. But if you order it now, you can go to join.googlizationnation.com. That's join.googlizationnation.com. You can get a free book, and it'll be shipped out within a few days. You'll have that in your hands, but immediately you'll get a download copy, PDF copy, and you can start reading it. So appreciate that. So again, go to join.googlizationnation.com. If you prefer to pay the full price, it's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. But it's free for the asking. Very, very simple. All you need to go up. We want to thank Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions again for being our sponsors. You'll hear a little bit more from them in just a few minutes. And if you want to get updates and notices about the show and the live streams and webinars and other things that we're planning, you can just go to googlizationnation.com. If you go to join.googlizationnation.com, you get the book. If you just go to googlizationnation.com, you just subscribe, and you'll get some emails and notices when we've got some updates. Keith, you were going to say something.
Also, we have the live chat line for those of you that are listening today right now. And if you want to get into the conversation, the number to call in, we don't do this silly, scary, hide behind the curtains kind of thing, Ira. We're live. So 561-623-9429. You want to put us on the spot, you want to ask Clinton a good question, reach out. The line's open.
So we got a lot to talk about. This, I'm sure this show, as many of them do, we have great conversations with everybody and really appreciate our guests and people who submit some questions. But we've got Clinton Eppleman. I met Clint just about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago. He and I sat on a panel next to each other. It was basically workforce forecast, or a forecast. It wasn't just a workforce, but the forecast for 2020 in the Lehigh Valley. It was sponsored by Lehigh Valley Business, and with kind of a full house that day, and people wanted to hear. We talked about everything from mergers and acquisitions to the economy. We had somebody from the economic development. I spoke on the workforce, which no big surprise. And then Clinton talked about cybersecurity, what's ahead. And then we sat right next to each other, and I asked him to be on the show, and that started this. He's got a really interesting take on this, and I had no clue when he said, "Hey, I'm going to talk about lessons from the Civil War of how it relates to cybersecurity." And I'm a reasonably smart guy to realize that Abe Lincoln and Robert Lee and Ulysses Grant did not have mobile phones back then. They didn't have phones. So it was sort of curious, and I started to do a little research, and it's really interesting. So I'm excited to hear about that. I've heard a lot of people speak on Civil War and leadership lessons, but the relationship between that and cybersecurity was pretty curious. So I mentioned just a few minutes ago that Clinton works for Morefield Communications. He's been there for a number of years. He's got a degree in physics, and he's a certified, I don't even know what the initials mean, but a CISSP. Maybe he can help us out there. But he's helping shape the approach. Morefield's communication in central Pennsylvania, their cybersecurity. So really excited to have you today, Clinton. Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon, Ira. Thank you. And, thanks you guys for having me on the show. CIS stands for Certified Information Systems Security Professional.
Okay, perfect. And that's why you're here. So, it's interesting. Just on little things that happened this week. Monday, I got a phone call from a client of mine. And my clients, they said, "Hey, I sent you an email, but maybe it was too late on Friday." And I know I responded to her. And she says, "I'm not getting it." I said, "Can you check your spam and junk?" And she's not getting it. And it was just a little thing, but Microsoft, and I know many people use Microsoft, they had an upgrade to their Exchange servers, their mail server. And apparently my emails were they used to go into spam. Now they didn't go through at all. And it turned out that there was a certificate, that was incorrectly set up in my email. It took about 30 seconds to fix it. But there's just, again, we put these things in place and we think they're working, and then they're not working. And then there's an update, and then something else is not working, which allows and the value of having those certificates was, to prevent spoofing. And that's certainly not something I want is my, somebody spoofing my emails and sending them out to all my clients or who knows where. So there's little things that happen every day. But let's start, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back 160 years, Clint.
Sure.
And we're talking about the Civil War. That intrigued me because it was the very first thing you said is let's talk about cybersecurity lessons in HR and the Civil War. So tell us, and I know you're passionate about the Civil War, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have 3 points that I would like to relate to cybersecurity and HR that we can learn from the Civil War. So kind of my interests, I'm pretty passionate about Battle of Gettysburg. And the first thing that I'd like to parallel, that I'd like to draw is the artillery between the Union and Confederate armies. They had different approaches for how they structured their artillery batteries. The Union Army used one caliber gun. So, they would have 6 or so guns, and they would all be the same type of ammunition. Where the Confederate Army they had theirs organized in such a way that it was a mixture of calibers. So they would short and long range ammunition. And, they're just like, pretty much anything else, there are pluses and minuses to both ways of structuring that. So you have challenges like supply chain. You have to be able to supply ammunition, and you have to be able to supply the correct type when you need it. You also have the possibility, if you're mixing different caliber guns, of mixing up what ammunition you're putting in to a particular cannon. So you could get if you put something and it's too big, you could get it stuck, and then the gun's rendered useless. So these challenges, there's not necessarily a right way or wrong way. It's how you execute and how you communicate, how you manage your supply chain. And that holds true in cybersecurity. You can come up with the greatest policy for your organization. It can be wonderful, but if you're not executing, if you're not delivering it correctly, it's not going to be effective. And the second point that I'd like to make is around leadership in the Civil War. Daniel Sickles was a general in charge of the Third Corps on the Union Army, and he's someone that he doesn't have many fans as far as the quality of work that he did while he was in the Civil War. And, he made some decisions on July 2nd, 1863 that relates to, why we have the wheat field, the peach orchard, Little Round Top, things that, you may not know a lot about the Civil War or Gettysburg, but those names, have carried through time and are written in the history books now because of a decision he made to move his Third Corps farther ahead than what the commanding general wanted. And those decisions that he made come back to leadership. He was charged with his particular corps, and he was given a set of instructions and executing against it. And, ultimately he made decisions that, some would argue were counter to those orders. But ultimately, he wasn't the person in charge of all the Union troops on the field, and there is some responsibility with General Meade, who was in charge, and the relationship that they had. In my opinion, Meade didn't necessarily give as much attention to the Third Corps as perhaps was necessary, and the events as they unfolded throughout the day. Potentially change the outcome of the war. And it can be argued that, on July 2nd, the Union Army came out, somewhat by luck. And, going back to something you said earlier, it's interesting, in 1863, communication, there were a lot of communication challenges, right? You didn't have cell phones, you didn't have walkie-talkies. So, in a battle, in a campaign, communication was key. If you didn't have good communications, things could go awry relatively quickly. And the same holds true today in cybersecurity. Typically, why I like to talk about the Civil War is one of the reasons you highlighted earlier, and that was because of leadership. Cybersecurity in your organization should be leader-driven. It's not something that should be driven by the IT department. It's not something that should be driven by human resources. It's something that needs to be leader-driven, and it needs to be ingrained into culture of the organization for it to be successful. And then the third point, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, you go ahead. Continue. I thought you were done.
No, the third point is, how the Civil War relates to human resources, right? Recruitment and retention of soldiers was, something that was very critical. In 1861, when the war started, everyone thought that, First Manassas, the fight would be over in a day, and that would be the end of the war. Well, by the time the Battle of Gettysburg rolls around, the Gettysburg campaign starting in June of 1863, you're 2 years into it. And, by this point in time, people have, their romanticism has evaporated. So the idea of going off to war, the realities and the potential outcome of the war, you have less support, people that, understand now that there's a very high likelihood that you're going to have some sort of physical harm if you go off to war. And when the Gettysburg campaign starts, Andrew Curtin, the governor of Pennsylvania, he sends a call multiple times to Washington. He was friends with President Lincoln because he recognized that the Army of Northern Virginia was headed towards Pennsylvania. And what he did was he sent calls for, hey, we need to raise more troops to protect Pennsylvania. And it was a real tough sell in Pennsylvania. On June 14th, what happens, Lincoln puts out a call for 100,000 troops. 50,000 of those are supposed to come from Pennsylvania. Where I'm from in South Central Pennsylvania at the time, there was a large German population that had, immigrated from Germany, and they weren't inclined to want to participate in the Civil War. Most of them, a majority were, their occupation, they were farmers. And all that they wanted to do was, farm and make a living. They had no interest in participating in a war, even if it meant protecting, their local farms. And in fact, there are quite a few instances that are written down where, as troops are marching through the property of the local farmers in and around Adams County, their concern isn't for the troops or the war. Their concern is around the crops that they're trampling. So, recruitment and retention of soldiers in the war was something that was a struggle. There was an 1863 act, basically I guess you could call it the second draft that was put into effect in the United States. And, it caused draft riots in New York City after the Battle of Gettysburg because people thought that it was unfair because you could pay $300 to effectively get out of having to participate in the draft. So they felt that it was targeted towards folks that were, on the lower end of the economic scale. Those challenges, there are a lot of lessons you can take away from the Civil War, and it translates beyond just military history or history in general, but you can apply them to cybersecurity and human resources as well.
100%.
Yeah. So let's take this back to, some kind of, we want to be able to provide some practical kind of tips and solutions. And there's a couple questions that came in. But one of the things that I was reading was, and again, I don't want to get too far into the history details because we don't have time. We're coming up on a break in just a few minutes. But during the Battle of Gettysburg at Pickett's charge, there was an interesting story, and one of the things was that when they maneuvered the tanks, they pulled back the Union artillery. They pulled it back and they went silent to protect them. And the Confederates thought that because it went silent was that they destroyed all the cannons. And the moral of the story was, when it comes to cybersecurity, just because if you're measuring how many attacks you have and they go, we don't get many attacks, that's not necessarily a good sign, because somebody may be laying in wait, or it means they broke through already and you don't even know it. Basically the moral of the story is it depends on the metrics, and you need to rely on people like you, Clint, that understand that everybody gets attacked. And just because the attacks have waned doesn't mean that they've gone away and that your protection's so good that they're not going to break through, but because they're just laying in wait, or they might have broke through already. The other part of that was that they call Abe Lincoln. Again, I did some research for this to kind of keep up with you. Abe Lincoln, they called the first wired president, because apparently he used to just used to just hang around the telegraph to get updates from the battlefield, so it was literally wired president because it was a telegraph. But,
Well,
again, you can imagine him 160 years later, being on Twitter all day long, watching what was going on.
and he also, if I remember correctly, he also spent a lot of time going to the battlefield, more so than I think any president ever had. But I'm not going to pretend I'm the history buff here.
Yeah,
I think after the break, I think I want to pick your brain, Clinton, about how those core principles impact an organization on an HR level, but maybe even more so on an IT level, because a lot of the time we talk here on the show about how humans and technology are merging. I love the idea of coming from the other direction and talk about how IT has to help shape human behavior inside of organizations.
Excellent.
Sure.
So you've been listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. Our topic today is cybersecurity and HR. We got a little bit of a lesson on on how cybersecurity and the Civil War or lessons from the Civil War might help us in cybersecurity. We've been talking with Clinton Eppleman from Morefield Communication. We're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from our sponsors, Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions. So stay right where you are. We'll be back in less than 2 minutes.
Imagine how your company would grow if your candidate experience earned a 99% approval rating. Well, to get to 99%, you need the 3 best letters in recruitment technology, XOR. Zor's text bots, chat bots, and audio bots increased IKEA's candidate conversion rate 455%. Zor decreases candidate drop-off rates, improves your candidate experience, and collects analytics for future strategies. To learn more, check out Zor.ai. That's XOR.ai.
Hi everyone, this is Ira Wolf, author of Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. I'm excited to announce that my online course, Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter, is open for business. This course is the culmination of a 2-year-long project and releases recruiting tips I've learned after hundreds of hours of research, speaking with thousands of conference attendees, and interviews with dozens of experts. It's all available to you in Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter. To receive more information or get started, visit our website at www.successperformancesolutions.com and click on the tab Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf. I'm here with Keith Compagna and our guest today, cybersecurity expert, specialist, Clinton Eppleman from Morefield Communications. We were talking right before the break about Civil War lessons and how it relates to cybersecurity, something I was clueless of before. I had no idea where that conversation was going to go, but it was fun and very interesting and a lot of parallels. Hey, Clinton, I want to start out here. We did have a question from Jasper, who put something in the chat. He wants to know do you find companies give IT too much control? And I sort of mentioned that earlier. I'm not sure if it's too much control versus my personal thing is, but love your opinion versus better collaboration. Because if you give IT all the control over all the technology, there may be some loss of functionality because they're not looking at the candidate experience for sure, or even what what any department. Doesn't have to be just HR. It could be finance or accounting or sales or marketing. But we certainly need cybersecurity. But if we swing the pendulum so far over that way, then functionality can go away. But that's my opinion. What from an expert opinion, from somebody that deals with it every day, can we give you too much control?
Yeah, so how I would answer that is I would check the cybersecurity policy of the organization to be able to answer that question. And the reason why I say that is because by and large, I find a lot of small to mid-sized businesses outside of verticals that require some sort of compliance or regulation, they really don't have a formalized cybersecurity policy. So the information technology department in and of itself should not be creating and setting the cybersecurity policy for the organization. That should be something that someone on the executive management team with board buy-in and input from all the stakeholders in the organization. They should be working together to develop the cybersecurity policy. And then IT is, of course, going to execute against that based upon the requirements of the policy. So I think what people inevitably see, especially in the small to mid-sized space, where organizations, you don't have unlimited resources. So what ends up happening is the information technology department, they have to bear the responsibility of not only developing the cybersecurity policy but also executing it. So that's kind of how I would answer.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated subject. So, during the break, we talked about a couple things, where we're going with this. And again, we want to give some practical tips to everyone, especially, relating to HR. So you had mentioned something about recruitment and the job descriptions. Again, I mentioned earlier about forms, and I know, and especially dealing with a lot of small, medium-sized companies like Morefield does. I mean, you cover all of bases, but that a lot of companies still have homegrown forms. People, applicants fill them out. The back end may not be secure how that information is collected. What they do with that information afterwards may not be protected. But you mentioned, but I was really curious on your take on where job descriptions come into this.
Yeah, so I guess if you think back, if you're old enough to remember the 90s, there were a lot of movies in the 90s related to hacking. And I would say there are two words that were used a lot in these sorts of movies, hacking and firewall. So, at a technical level, you don't have to understand what a firewall is. It's a device that protects, your internal network from the public internet. So by and large today, most cybersecurity incidents are not because someone, quote unquote, was able to hack through your firewall. Most cybersecurity events today are delivered, through phishing, right? Social engineering. So when it comes to recruitment and, the job descriptions that you're putting out online, you want to think about what information you're including in those job descriptions. Because a lot of times if you're hiring for, information technology position is a great example. You need to list out the specific skills and the specific systems that the candidate would need experience in. So what do people do? They list them out one after another on a list. And then they post that publicly so anyone can see it. So if you have systems that are, perhaps antiquated, that are no longer supported by a manufacturer, that means there's no security updates for those systems. And what you're doing is, you're publicly advertising, hey, we're using this, we have technology debt that we have. And you're creating a roadmap for someone to profile your organization.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going with that. Can you give a specific example of a skill set that might be needed, or maybe even in technology?
Well, it doesn't even have to be, an information technology position. It can be a position. It can be listing, what kind of CRM you use. It can be listing what.
That's what I meant. Something specific that people can relate to.
Right, because now if I know what kind of CRM you use, what kind of financial application, if I'm going to, send you a social engineering email or a phishing email to try to get you to do something, I can make it sound more real. And if it sounds real, people are more likely to accept it on face value and not sit there and question and think, maybe this is something I should, run by someone else, have a second set of eyes. We're quick to make decisions. So, social engineering is all about, basically hacking someone's psychological impulses. So if, consider in your job description, maybe sanitizing them. You don't have to list a specific CRM, just list that you need to have experience using a CRM because, those skills kind of translate from platform to platform. And, those things are, something that people could probably quickly pick up if they're not familiar with the particular platform you're invested in.
That is amazing. I mean, my mind's just racing with what you just said. I mean, that's crazy because you see that all the time. Companies asking for specific knowledge or expertise in a particular software, and again, if I get an email that says, "Hey, there's a vulnerability in your Word document that I received," I mean, it's something I use every day. I'm going to pay more attention to that than if they come up with some other software name that I never heard of. So.
Yeah, and one other comment I would like to make, going back to the idea of the data that you collect, it's probably been about a year and a half now. In Pennsylvania, there's the Dittman ruling, which basically puts a burden on organizations to safeguard employee data that they collect and store. So if you're collecting, Social Security number, health information of your employees, the burden is on the employer to safeguard that information. So prior to that ruling, if someone, an attacker was able to gain access to that information, and I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to be able to use the legal terminology. But prior to the Dittman ruling, what would happen is the employer could say, "Hey, look, someone hacked us. It wasn't our fault." But now, with the Dittman ruling, the burden's on the employer to safeguard that data. So it's not unrealistic to expect that couldn't be expanded to include data that you're collecting for applicants to positions. And it may not necessarily just be in the job applications that you're filling out, but once you go a step beyond that, and they send you a copy of their driver's license or other documents as part of that employment process, you're absolutely right. How are you collecting that data? Are they just emailing it to you? Do they have a secure method of getting it to you? And then what are your policies and procedures around storing that data and destroying it once you no longer need it?
So I'm going to make an assumption here. I mean that what I was saying is that, and I think you just answered it, but it is if the information within the system as it's being collected is secure, but then someone prints it out. They print out the applications to take them home because it's too hard to log into the VPN, whatever it is. And now they have them in a folder and they discard them and they throw them in their trash. That breaks all the security you had. I mean, so when you're writing a cybersecurity policy, is that included, or is that outside the purview of what most policies include?
So, generally speaking, cybersecurity policy is typically going to apply to digital data. But I think if you take a structured approach at creating a cybersecurity policy for the entire organization, what you're going to do is you're going to bring key stakeholders into that process. And HR is going to be a key stakeholder. So during that structured process of creating a policy, you're going to uncover things like, such as printing out paper copies of records. Those things are going to come up during the conversation, and you can work through those challenges during the process. But, this all kind of hinges upon, sitting down and having a formal discussion where you're bringing everyone together, to think about the people, the processes, and the technology and the organization and how they all tie together. So, that's the first step. And HR can be a part of that process. HR can advocate for having a structured cybersecurity policy and, can help be a catalyst to get that conversation going. And then, there are other things that are going to come up in other departments, things that don't directly fall under cybersecurity that you're going to be able to discuss and, figure out how you're going to address those on a case-by-case basis.
Clinton, let me chime in here quick. Clinton, we spend a lot of time talking to HR people and about HR people in terms of their level of readiness to take on what we consider modern day challenges and challenges that they're going to face in the not too distant future. And the general consensus is that the vast majority of HR departments and HR leaders not prepared for what needs to be done. And for the most part, they lack the know-how to where to start without on their own. And we, depending on the guest we have, we pretty much fall into like a 90% of the HR leaders out there simply don't know what they don't know, and they're just ill-prepared. Could you provide a little bit of a color here in terms of how many businesses, maybe on the small side, I don't know, I don't know how much of a challenge this is on the enterprise side, but I would suspect on the small to medium-sized businesses, how many of them do you think out of 100 are actually, cybersecurity ready?
For my clarification, when you say cybersecurity ready, you mean that there's some structured, formal approach to cybersecurity in the organization. That it's not something that is relegated to the IT department.
Right. It's not, the difference would be probably, we're ready for if something were to happen.
So I would say, my experience is you're probably 25 to 30% in the small to mid-sized market. Now,
that are capable.
That's correct. Now, I say that there may be 85% of organizations out there that think they are sitting in a good position. However, looking at, what some folks classify as, a good approach, in my mind, isn't necessarily a good approach. So I think there's some, false sense of security out there. And I think, one thing that HR can do is, people, right? You have to, the culture of the organization, you should treat people as assets to the organization. So, the idea of end user awareness training, it's key to any successful cybersecurity program in an organization. So, from a human resources perspective, one of the things that you could do is you can say, okay, look, we think our organization is, cybersecurity ready. Measure it. Run a phishing campaign. There are services out there where you can run a phishing campaign and you can test your organization and you can test that readiness. You can evaluate how effective your awareness training program is. And that way you have, a data point that you can say, hey, we're doing a great job, or, we need to do some more work.
Yeah. And so it seems like, if to the small, medium-sized businesses out there that don't know, we don't want them to get in touch with you, and maybe you can help them connect the dots or get to the testing area so they could start recognizing where their weak spots are. How can somebody out there listening, or for those that connect through us online, how can they reach you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Clinton.Eppleman, or you can reach us at our website, Morefield.com, Morefield.
Do me a favor, Clinton. Do that one again. You got a little bit quiet there. Can you get closer to the speaker?
Sure. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Clinton.Eppleman, or visiting Morefield.com. It's our corporate website.
Yeah, and we'll have that up. We'll have that up on the podcast as well afterwards. So for anyone who's listening later, but Eppleman is Eppleman, correct, Clinton?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent, Clinton. My mind's still buzzing with what you were talking about with job descriptions. I think that was a brilliant suggestion, something I've never heard before, and I follow this stuff all the time. So that, to me, made today worthwhile. A million other topics to cover. Keith, it sounded like you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to hit him with our standard end of the podcast question, and just to see if we can't get a little bit of what's to come. So Clinton,
that was my question.
Yeah, Clinton, let's just say we bring you back on the show a year from today. What are we going to be talking about that everyone needs to know?
I think a year from today, I think people are going to be tired of hearing about cybersecurity as it relates to politics. I think with the upcoming election, it's going to be something that's going to be in the forefront of everyone's mind. Earlier this week in Iowa, the Democratic caucus had some issues with the technology that they were using, being able to predict, give output of the election results. And I think early Tuesday morning they released a statement, and it was very interesting to me. The second paragraph, the first paragraph, just more or less was outlining that hey, there was an election. The second paragraph pointed out, before they got into any other details about it, the fact that they were certain that it was not a cybersecurity related incident. So, I think it's, in the election season, we hear about data breaches all the time. It seems like every week or two there is a major data breach that you read about in the news that's wide impacting to a lot of people. And, in the election season, it just shows that, anytime there's any sort of glitch, people are immediately going to think that there's the potential for a cybersecurity related incident. So I think, looking to a year in the future, sure, you're going to have those frequent data breaches that we're all familiar with seeing on the news. What you don't see on the news are all those small and mid-sized businesses that get hit with ransomware or phishing attack. You don't see that sort of stuff publicized. So I think a year from now, things are going to remain the same. Most cybersecurity incidents are financially motivated. So it's just going to be a matter of, what the latest and greatest attack vector is at the time that's going to make the waves. And I think everyone's going to be tired of hearing about cybersecurity until after the election's over.
But we'll still be talking about it. It's not going away, right? People aren't going to take a break from phishing, hacking, and figuring out new ways to get in to our systems. So, Clinton, I appreciate you being here so much. Fortuitous that we met about 3 months ago today, I think, or 2 months ago today. So I appreciate you taking the time out. There's a million other topics I had, talking about security with using chatbots and voice-activated devices, which are exploding all over the place, especially at work with gig workers, virtual workers. Again, our lives are getting better, but more complicated in many ways. So I appreciate you giving your insight, and hopefully you'll come back someday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Clinton.
Keith, I had no idea where this was going to go. We talked a lot, we both admitted we didn't have anybody on cybersecurity before. But it's obviously, it's huge, vast topic. And we barely scratched the surface again. So
it is something, there's a deep rabbit hole here, and me, I love rabbit holes. So yep. I say we start.
We'll do it again. So anybody listening out there, if this is your area, you have a strong opinion, one way or the other, if you have an expertise on, especially looking at the future workforce, gig workers, virtual workers, voice activated devices. I mean, all these things are going to be coming into play, and and a lot of companies don't have the basics done for cybersecurity. They don't have a policy, or they're fighting with IT, again, a lot of work to be done. So yes, it's good. A couple of reminders. I've got this week, we had to reschedule them from last week. Monday at 12 noon, we've got Jason Averbook on live stream, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Facebook and LinkedIn. We're going to be doing the live interview with Jason Averbook. Hopefully his schedule permits this time. But stay tuned. So it won't be on Geeks, Geezers, Googleization, but it'll be on a live stream. So pay attention to that. We've got a great lineup coming in February. A lot of good guests. Reminder for those who still want to order my book for free, Recruiting in the Age of Googleization, edition 2.0. You can get it by going to join.googleizationnation.com. gettysburg.com. Any closing comments or words?
No, I mean, I think this one was a great one. I like how we spent so much time talking about the future of work. It's great to reflect back about what it was like in the past during the Civil War time. No, great
amazing.
time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. First wired president, Abe Lincoln, right?
Yep, one of my favorites, John Adams and Abe Lincoln, and George Washington, of course. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Good time today.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions. We are on every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY.com. You can listen to our podcasts on Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeart. You name it, we are there. And we've got over 60 shows up there online now. So, and you can visit geeksgeezersgoogleization.com. Lots of Googleization today. geeksgeezersgoogleization.com, where we archive everything. So until next week of the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization show, this is Ira Wolf and Keith Campagna. Don't let the shift hit your plans.